I haven't joined a game jam in over 2 years. You can see from my channel uploads that I've been mostly experimenting with mini side projects instead of committing to making a game. So today I've decided to break that streak, because about a week ago I participated in the 188th Mini Jam, a game making event hosted about every other week where participants make a game in 72 hours. The theme of the jam was mystery, which is an optional theme that you can center your game around. The required limitation, on the other hand, all in a box, revealed after the jam started, was what I actually decided to focus on. I didn't think I could create good art for a mystery themed game, so I decided to just ignore it because it wasn't mandatory anyway. Before we begin the video, shout out to my friend Meeplu who created the music for this game. Anyways, as with most of the projects you'll see on this channel, we will be using the Bevy Game Engine and the programming language Rust for this project. I know this might not seem like a very smart choice, given it is going to be a lot easier to use an established and fully featured game engine like Unity or Godot for a game jam, but I believe I'm familiar enough with the Bevy Game Engine and have written enough quote-unquote boilerplate code throughout my career to successfully create a playable game within the 72-hour time frame. My final game idea that I agreed upon was a roguelike where the player is literally inside of a toy box fighting toy-themed enemies. That idea is pretty surface level, so I decided that there will also be mystery boxes throughout the game, which can contain literally anything from the game. You can get loot, but also be ambushed by random enemies from the game. So I admit that I could probably have thought of a more interesting game idea than mystery boxes in a standard roguelike, but I honestly wanted to create a fully featured game for this game jam, so I stuck with a more traditional approach to the theme. Anyway, I started out with creating some art for the game. I decided to go with a simple low resolution pixel art style because I believe that most of the time I spend on this game is going to be on the programming. So it should be a lot more efficient if I simplify the art style so that it takes less time for me to create the art of the game. I decided that the player would be a little toy knight inside of the toy box labyrinth, so I created the player and a simple run animation inside of a sprite. Next, I created a simple cardboard tile set. I'm pretty proud of the repeating floor tiles in this game, which I think add a lot of texture to the game, which would otherwise feel a lot more bland. Anyways, after creating the tile set, I created a template level inside of the tiled tile map editor. Just for some background, since the Bevy Game Engine doesn't have a built-in editor, I'm going to be using a combination of clever programming, TOML files, and the tiled editor to basically create the levels for my game. But for now, I've made a simple top-down player controller where the player can run around and shoot fireballs. These fireballs will definitely not be the player's final attack, but it's nice to have a system up and working at first. Next, I got started on implementing a dialogue and inventory system for our game. I didn't want to waste time creating a tutorial for the game because the controls for this game were all really intuitive. So I figured a little bit of dialogue at the start of the game could go a long way on contextualizing what to do for the player. An inventory system was also necessary so that the items which drop from our mystery loot boxes could actually be useful. This was the very first iteration of our dialogue system, and not only is this text revealing at an unbearably slow rate, but there was also no way for people who had already read the dialogue to skip over it. Also, you'll probably notice that the person who is speaking is box_1 because I hadn't yet created a way for myself to customize who was speaking. So the person who was speaking would just be displayed as the key for the dialogue in our dialogue hash map. I also helped clarify the controls by having an indicator displaying RMB for right mouse button whenever the player could interact with something that it was nearby with. And you'll probably notice the inventory system basically doesn't exist except for a hash map containing item data right now. You can interact with this sword item on the ground, but nothing really happens after you make the item disappear. So after a little bit of coding, I made it so that you could skip the dialogue animation by clicking the right mouse button in the middle of the dialogue animation. And I also made it so that at a certain point in the dialogue, our NPC can spawn a sword item for us to pick up. I have to admit that it is kind of ballsy to write almost all the systems for a roguelike from scratch within a 72-hour time frame, but I did have a lot of boilerplate code ready for loading tile maps, which would have probably taken the most amount of time if I didn't know how to do so in the Bevy Game Engine. So for that, I was actually really glad. The sword still basically does nothing. It exists and we can swing it around after I wrote some more code, but this is purely aesthetic and we have yet to implement an inventory system for our game. I made a lot of progress after this point. I must have been in a flow state or something because what you're about to see was probably accomplished in about an hour. First, I made this really dramatic cutscene where everything is dark at first, but when the boxed NPC tells you that you are inside of a box, everything lights up and you understand that you are inside of a box world now. You might also notice that I completed the inventory system and the sword actually can be picked up and used. The player statistics are also being displayed in the top left corner where you can also see your inventory. Additionally, if we walk to the right, you can see that we transition into another room where the player is introduced to the first type of enemy, the pawn. If we walk close to the pawns or hit them, they become enraged and encircle the player while throwing slow-moving fireball projectiles at the player. It should be noted that I also implemented a health system, as you can see that when the player becomes hit, their health decreases. Next, I created these traffic cones which block the player from bypassing the enemies in the current area and just going into the next room. This was actually kind of a pain to program because my tilemap collision system runs on a single array, so I had to modify that array each time I wanted the cones to be up. If the player beats all the enemies in the current room, they will be able to progress to the next room because the traffic cones will drop, but otherwise they will be stuck because of the traffic cones. I also used these cones later on to block the player from rushing past the first NPC, but right now you can just get stuck in the darkness with no weapon if you leave the area and just die to a bunch of enemies in the next room. Now that all the boring stuff is out of the way, we can actually start adding in some gameplay. First, we should implement the mystery box mechanic, which can contain anything, hence the all in the box theme. So in our data file, I've created a lottery of sorts. We've got 3 categories: weapons, armors, and enemies. There's actually a 4th category which is just a healing item, but each time that is selected we don't really need to do a lottery, so it shouldn't be included in our data file. Right now we only have 1 type of armor in the lottery, but I'll add more later, so don't think that the only armor we can get right now is Thor's helmet. Now this current version of the game is really buggy now that I'm looking back at it, and the boxes keep dropping hearts for some reason, but later on I've fixed the probability code, so just ignore that we keep getting an abnormal amount of healing items for now. When a good item such as a health orb or an item is being dropped to the player, I've programmed the box to read "you feel a sense of warmth." However, when the dialogue "you feel a sense of unease" is played, you had best be prepared. Yeah, this is a bit tough on the player if they don't have any gear. I did make it fair though, every enemy in this game can be dodged with skill and shouldn't just be tanked with better gear. I went on to update the lottery for weapons and armors, adding in some more weapons such as the mana staff, the knife, and the laser gun, as well as more armors such as the rusty helmet, the attack mail, the chainmail, and the spiky helmet. Using the power of being a developer, I've laid all the items out here on display. I took a little inspiration from a game which I've recently been spending a lot of time on called Deltarune with the armor system, where some armor has negative effects on defense but sharply increases your attack or some other trait. In hindsight though, this armor was vastly overpowered and a skilled player could easily become immortal with such an armor. For example, the spiky helmet increased your attack so much that you could 2-shot most of the enemies and 1-shot some enemies. I did my best to balance the weapons though, which if used in the intended way are definitely balanced in my opinion. Note that I said intended because there are a number of exploits which were found in the game that I just could not fix because they were post-jam. Okay, there are only 2 things left to do: add more rooms to the game and add more enemies to the game. These are both relatively straightforward, but let me go over the enemies first because I think enemies are a lot more interesting than just grinding out a few level layouts. First, I wanted to add a simple run and chase enemy because every game needs one of those. So I drew this purple slug in A-Spray and just made him chase the player while hurling fireballs at the player. He is really easy to evade, you just move away from him while shooting at him. Then I wanted to add more of a support enemy, so I drew this card guy and made him have this shotgun bullet pattern, which would make the landscape a lot more constrained to move around. The pattern is very dodgeable as long as you aren't being careless though, which is very nice. Okay, this might be a little bit of a shocker, but I haven't really been explaining the whole level situation this entire time. The game is going to have randomly generated rooms, so basically each exit which I've marked with the random flag will go through a random list of rooms and find a suitable room depending on the exits and entrances available in a room. The rooms all seem like they are part of a greater whole though because of the seamless level transition which I've been working on. So the game is basically basically done now. That is, after I added some sound effects. I created a neat little jam page on itch.io and started to rate other people's games. In the end, these were my rankings for the jam. Not great, but also not too shabby considering I haven't made a jam game in over 2 years. That's it for this video. Thank you all for tuning in. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Peace.